2, where I'm just going over some of your comments on my last video. So your next comment then. So this comment is in directly relation to me discussing the contrasting DSM-5 with the ICD-11. So this commenter says, the article discussed surprised me, as when I last read through the ICD-11's criteria, you didn't come away with the impression given by the article. ICD-11 doesn't strike me as all that different from DSM-5, and I believe that it was the intention, as they wanted to harmonise the two manuals. The ICD-11 has sections on how to distinguish features of autism from those found more generally, in the section Boundary with Normality, as well as boundaries between it and 18 other disorders which have similar features. And it has guides to how autism presents during different stages of development, something that you don't think a DSM-5 does. The real problem is a cultural trend that, in the name of inclusivity, is doing its best to destroy any notion of normality. All in favour of undoing reactionary value judgments around normality, but you don't think that should lead us to lose touch with reality. The person goes on to say, I'm gay, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But it doesn't mean I deny that being gay is not the norm. And same with autism. I'm not going to pretend that autism doesn't give me deficits, inabilities that are the norm for humans. So yeah, that's interesting, and I agree. I think we can see normal as meaning different things. There are different ways of interpreting the word normal. There's normal that has value judgment, suggesting that something that is normal is better than, or in some way having more value, which is a kind of like negative interpretation. But again, there's also just statistical normality, like things can be normal just by dint of the fact that it's like, you know, the sort of the majority, as it were, like statistically normal, like on a bell curve, as it were, like where most people fall on that bell curve. Most people fall in the middle, which is seen as the statistical norm, like they're not at one extreme or the other. That's statistical normality, and that doesn't have to have any value judgment attached to it. So yeah, I mean, obviously, like you said, being gay is statistically abnormal in a statistical sense because most people are not gay. I happen to be gay as well, lesbian. But yeah, it's not the majority. Most people are heterosexual. So in that respect, it's abnormal. But that doesn't mean it's bad, and it doesn't mean it's wrong, because I'm not saying it's abnormal in any value judgment way. It's just, as you were saying, it's outside of the norm. So yeah, there are different ways of interpreting normality, and I think the neurodiversity movement gets fixated on like value judgments, and obviously like you know, we need to strip normal, abnormal of any value judgments. Just because something is abnormal doesn't make it bad or wrong or inferior or less worthy than, essentially. I think that's where the confusion lies. It depends in what way you're using these terms. So the next comment now. Okay, one of you says, one of you asks if I've seen a new season of Love on the Spectrum, which is on Netflix. You say it's pretty good. Yes, I have seen it. I saw all of it, and I've seen the other seasons as well. It was okay. I could do a whole video on that if you want me to. Do let me know if you'd like me to do a video on that. That would take a whole video, but yes, I have seen it. So the next comment now. The fear is that autism becomes like a catch-all diagnosis for people that feel a little different. But you don't really see that yourself, because people have to meet enough criteria to get a diagnosis. It is not like every GP is suddenly handing out a diagnosis. So you're basically saying that the fear that autism diagnosis just becomes like a catch-all diagnosis for people that feel a little different is, you don't think it's correct, because you think that, people do have to meet enough criteria and so on and so forth. That is true, of course, and it is pretty difficult to get a diagnosis. Waiting lists are very, very long. That would take a whole other video. There is another question though as to this boundary with normality situation, and to what extent autism is becoming widened to include so many different people that the concept becomes meaningless. That will take another video. In which case, the argument there would be not for not diagnosing people. I think diagnosis is very important. The question there would be subgroups, I would say, but that's a debate for a whole other video, so I'm not going to go into that now. The next comment says that most assessments rely on interpretation. Some cases are clear-cut, and almost everyone will agree. I would say, I was a pretty clear-cut case, and I got my diagnosis. There wasn't any debate, and it was very straightforward once I got to see the right people, that is. But many are open to debate. I guess they would be the more kind of like cases where maybe there's not enough evidence, because obviously the more evidence you bring to any assessment, the easier it is to diagnose you, essentially. It's going to be a lot harder to diagnose someone who doesn't have that much evidence, particularly from childhood, and who doesn't maybe have like parents and other people around them. It could potentially be a bit harder to diagnose people like that. Certainly true with autism, clinicians may come to different judgments, and consequences of getting it wrong in either direction can be profound. There needs to be double, triple checking of decisions involving numerous people in diagnosis to avoid over-reliance on a single person's judgment. Completely agree with that. Completely agree. The next comment says that you agree with my thoughts, and it's scary to think that people who don't feel they belong... it's scary to think that people who don't feel they belong might try to join a so-called neurodivergence. You don't think that you personally belong on a spectrum, although you have been looking at the ICD11, and you believe that you could convince people since you do have some traits. But you are able to live your life. Your main problem is aphantasia and something called SDAM. I'm not sure what that stands for. I think it's a memory disorder. If you correct me if I'm wrong. But it does have positives. Like, for example, that you're never scared of anything since you can't imagine it. You can't imagine you can't imagine it. But you can't remember the past like others do. So you cannot develop friendships. You live in the now. And this is the most, and then you also, which I thought was very lovely to hear, this is the most authentic channel about autism for someone with ASD I've ever found. So thank you very much for that. I have the opposite of aphantasia. I'm closer to the hyperphantasic end of the scale. I'm not sure if I would count as completely hyperphantasic. I mean, it's hard to say because I don't know what most people see in their heads. But I'm definitely extremely visual, and I have very strong visual imagery in my head. So yeah, I'm at the other end of the scale. Another one of you says that you hate the term neurodivergent, and if anyone uses it from me, you are quick to tell them I'm disabled and that I hate that cutesy euphemism. You wish that it was like the old days where people were content to just be nerds and geeks without yearning for some sort of medical label as a justification. I agree with you. I can't stand the term neurodivergent either. It makes me feel very squeamish. I prefer to say either autism or just to say I have a disability. I am neurologically disabled. I hate the word divergent. What does that mean? It doesn't add anything at all. It just trivialises it, if you ask me. But that's just my opinion. I know some people like it, and that's absolutely fine if you like that label for yourself. But personally, I don't like it for myself. This person also says, even if I become a multi-millionaire tomorrow, you will still be disabled and impaired as you are unable to form normal bonds with others, and that it is not all society. The next comment says, that your problems were noticed by your parents from before you were 3, teachers, etc., and you agree with the article there needs to be much clear subtyping of autism. The fetishisation of social model is dangerous. So in my case, being housebound, you have very limited involvement with society at the moment, and yet it's gone 1 a.m. in the morning, and you have yet to go to bed because this morning you were hyper-focusing on your interests, which meant you were late to start house cleaning because you always clean the house on Sundays in precisely the same order, and bits of house that are not part of your routine never get done. You say that before COVID your mother would have to come over and do them, and you had to do it all in the exact same way, and you always do despite running late, whereas someone without autism might have adjusted the cleaning to take into account the reduced time at which to do it. And this combined with executive dysfunction and slows you down, meant that, as always, it took you 7 hours to do, followed by more hyper-focusing this evening. You're not sure what sort of society could have prevented autism, caused inflexibility with routines. And then another commenter also says that you don't like it when people say that autism is not a disability. So yeah, so thanks for sharing that. I can relate to that experience. I don't think I'm quite as extreme as what you describe. I do have very, very strict routines. I think because I always go to bed at the same time, which is one of my strict routines, that sort of means that I think if I was running a bit late, I probably would try and alter it a bit, so I'm not quite as rigid as that. I would say I am very rigid though, but just in different ways. I suppose that shows how autism rigidity can take different forms. So I am very rigid, it's just in a slightly different way to what you describe. That's obviously a very, very rigid routine you have there, but one of my rigidities is that I always have to go to bed at exactly the same time. I can sometimes change it a little bit, but it has to be under my control, and I always do things in a very particular order. Yeah. But yeah, thank you for sharing. It just goes to show how disabling autism can be in and of itself, regardless of society. So I'll come back another time, so thank you for listening.